This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek Radio, and we're with Wolsan Liem, and she is a spokesperson for the Transportation Workers Union in Korea. Welcome to the show.
I work for the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, which is the largest affiliate of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions and organizes in both the public sector and private transport, public and private transport. And so our members, starting in the public sector, particularly rail, but also subway and many other non-transport public sector workers, have been striking since September 27th. The main issue that we're focused on right now, if you look at it, on the small scale, the main issue is the government's illegal attempt to illegally impose a performance-related pay and termination system on public institutions. But that's part of a larger program that is about restructuring the public sector. Is about two things. One is about restructuring the public sector towards a profit model and towards privatization, and this being one step. And then the other is about an effort to restructure the labor market to bring in more flexibility and make it easier to fire workers. And so by introducing this kind of more flexible system that also gives management more control over individual wage levels, and also it makes it easier to terminate workers on an individual basis. The idea is that the government thinks that if it starts with that in the public sector, it could then spread it out to the private sector, and it's a way of kind of shoring up profits for large corporations who are facing a drop in profit levels because of the economic crisis right now. So that's up to the public sector. Should I keep going with?
Well, one of the issues that is facing not just Korean workers but American workers is part-time temporary workers. Are these policies aimed at? Already in Korea, I understand 50% of the workers are temporary. Would these policies lead to even more temporary workers in Korea?
They're part of a broader. So I said this is part of a broader effort of restructuring. Let's say in the public sector to start with, which also it's basically aimed towards cost cutting and increasing efficiency, and part of that as well is the continued expansion of the use of precarious work or subcontracted work, so jobs that used to be permanent public service work, public sector jobs are being outsourced more and more to subcontracted precarious workers, and so it is definitely part of that broader process. And one of the things, in fact, so the workers that'll be impacted most immediately by the introduction of a performance-related pay system are permanently employed public sector workers, but where part of our demands is also that instead of using the government is giving some incentive money to public institutions to try to introduce this to get them to introduce this policy, and we're saying don't use that incentive money to introduce this policy, but rather to actually to stop the outsourcing, start bringing jobs back in-house into the public sector. And in general, it is in the broader, when you look at the whole economy, making it easier for employers to fire workers means making them more precarious, and so in that sense, it will expand precarious work in the long term.
And so these workers, particularly the truckers, went on strike. What union went on strike, and what has been the reaction of the government and the companies?
So I've talked up until now. We're talking about the striking workers are all members of the KPTU, but they're in different sectors. And so I've been talking about the public sector workers, which includes rail and subway up to this point, but also other non-transport. At the same time, so that strikes are on the 27th. On October 10th, are truck drivers who are organized as the Cargo Trucker Solidarity Division of the KPTU. They also began a strike, and they're fighting against an attempt by the government to deregulate the transport market in such a way that's going to increase competition between individual truck drivers, dropping rates, and then therefore putting pressure on workers to drive longer hours at higher speeds or overload, maybe take drugs to stay awake, and so creating both a dangerous situation for the drivers themselves and then also for the traveling public. And so this is an issue that we've been fighting for a long time, and that is sort of at the heart of the strike of truck drivers that's been going on for 2 days now, or is now in its third day.
And some drivers have been injured, and 45 have been arrested. Why don't you talk about the confrontations and what's happened in these confrontations?
The numbers keep going up, and so it's the arrests are at 50 people right now. And several workers injured, including one worker who's been hospitalized right now. And the issue is that truck drivers in Korea are owner drivers. They're classified as independent contractors, despite the fact that they're almost in an employment relationship with the transport companies that they contract with. And so that means they don't have the right to strike. They don't have the right to join trade unions. They don't have the right to collectively bargain, which is why our members, although we recognize them, the government doesn't recognize them. And so in order to get their voices heard, this is sort of the only way that they have, which is to collectively act. And the government is, even though you can't tell a independent contractor that their stopping work is illegal, right? Because that's, I mean, as an independent contractor, they're allowed to work and not work when they want to. But the government has brought in thousands and thousands of police to surround the protests, and sort of on the pretext that they're blocking transport trucks going into the ports or other hubs, or that they're having illegal rallies. There's been this massive police force and crackdown on the drivers, in which case clashes start to happen, and there's been, as I've said, a lot of arrests and injuries taking place.
Now, this comes on the heels of other health and safety disasters, the Seoul ferry disaster, which a ship ferry sunk, and many of the workers were temporary on the ship. They didn't have proper training. The temporary workers who work in transportation are afraid to speak up in some cases if they don't have a union, if they don't have any contract rights. So these truckers, you're saying, are fearful that if without a union contract, without more regulations, their whole life conditions, health and safety, will decline.
Yeah, actually, and it's not just health and safety for workers. It's the safety for the public who are using the roads. So the one at the heart of this is actually the freight rates that truck drivers are getting paid, which are already very low, because they're set through a lowest bidding tender process, a lowest cost tender process, and then there's multiple levels of subcontracting. And so, let's say I'm a freight owner and I'm shipping goods. I may give a transport company, I don't know, $100, let's say, to ship my cargo, but then there's an intermediary freight forwarder and then another subcontracted transport company that takes away some of that money. And so what the truck drivers are left with at the end is much, much less. Because the rates that they're getting are so low, they end up working up to over, close to, I think, well over 300 hours a month, which means that they're driving incredibly long hours. They're driving night times hours. They're trying to put more in their trucks than their trucks can actually carry. They're overloading because they have to do that in order to be able to feed their families. And so that is leading to truck crashes and an average of close to 120 deaths on the roads each year. And that's not just the drivers; it's other road users, which can be, people's friends, mother, father, family. And so it's what we were saying. It's another Seoul disaster on the roads, not the sea, but the roads. And the deregulation that the government is pushing right now is going to drive those rates down even further, and so therefore even further exacerbate this crisis that we have on our roads. And our solution to that is to ask for a standard rate system, so that truck drivers would get something like a basic living wage for what they're driving and be able to pay off the costs for maintaining their trucks and the like. And this is a system that exists to some extent it exists in Canada, it exists in some places in Australia, and we've been asking for it for many years now, and so that's kind of the heart of the issue of our strike.
And there was also a strike of the subway workers and the railway workers, and previously there was a strike against privatization of Korea Rail. What happened during those strikes?
So yeah, the railway workers were on strike for 23 days in 2013 against privatization. We were these are again our members, were more or less able to stop privatization, the plan that the government was pursuing at that time, because of the massive public support that strike got. And then more recently, we've seen the government again trying to implement performance-related pay in the railway as well as in subways and other public institutions, and then also restarting a drive towards privatization of the long-distance rail, as well as continuing to outsource in the subways, leading to more. I mean, we can talk about the dangers of outsourcing and privatization because of their impact on cooperation within different jobs in the railway or subway. And so the strike in the railway, which is still going on, is against this performance-related pay, and then also against privatization. And we did have our subway affiliates in Busan and 2 subway affiliates in the Seoul area were participating in that strike for the first 3 days, after which in the Seoul area there was an agreement reached not to implement the new wage system without an agreement between the unions and the management. So the subway unions in the Seoul area have left the strike, but it was quite historic because we haven't had a collective subway and rail strike for 22 years. So this is the first time in 22 years.
Now, the government, Park government, is very conservative, right-wing government, and there's a lot of opposition among people to the policies of the government, but it seems like there's increasing repression. What is the sentiment of people in Korea about the attacks on workers and health and safety, and what the government is doing politically and militarily as far as repression?
Yeah, there is more and more frustration with the Park Geun-hye government right now. It's growing. The government's approval ratings dropped below 30% for the first time recently. And you're right that the anger is about these putting profits before people's lives, and that is seen in the rail privatization. It's seen in the incident of the Seoul sinking. It's seen in this rampant outsourcing, which has caused severe accidents in the subway and deaths. It's seen now, for example, in trying to break the railway strike. The government is working with the rail corporation to bring in untrained substitute workers or strike breakers, which is leading to accidents in the railway. And so that there is a growing awareness about this. Definitely, most recently, so last year there was a huge protest during which the government brought in police that attacked workers with water cannons, and one farmer was hit and recently passed away from being hit by a water cannon, and that his death has also sparked a lot of anger. You mentioned militarization. There's also the government's unilateral pursuit of the stationing of missile defense, THAAD missile defense in South Korea without the consent of residents living in the area. And so all of these issues are definitely creating a lot of anger and sympathy for workers. On the other hand, the media is really controlled. The conservative media is controlled by corporations and the government, and we have to do a lot to battle the negative publicity or negative propaganda that goes out through those outlets that paint our public sector higher paid workers as a labor aristocracy and paint our lower paid truck workers, our precarious truck workers as violent or self-interested and the like. So it's a continued ideological battle that we fight.
And the United States, IMF, World Bank have pushed Korea to have deregulation, structural adjustments to make Korea more profitable. What has been the effect of those policies on the Korean working people?
The IMF World Bank intervention in South Korea happened after the Asian financial crisis in 1997, and that was the beginning of that was the beginning of labor flexibilization, the beginning of privatization, sort of right after that in the beginning of the 2000s, and so the creation of a very split labor market and a lot of low wage, precarious labor, and that becoming a basis of corporate profit in Korea, and that began. So it began with the IMF and World Bank, but the IMF and World Bank loans have been paid off. They were paid off a long time ago, and now it's the corporations and the conservative government that don't need pushing from anywhere else to move that on their own.
And there's a very popular movie which just came to the United States called Train to Busan, about the craziness of capitalism, hedge fund people, and what's happened to the people of Korea as far as capitalism. Is that kind of the sentiment, that people are very angry about what's happening with capitalism, what it's forcing people to do?
Uh, there is growing anger at the government and repression, and there's upset about because Korea is feeling the impact of the economic crisis more so than say the United States is now. It's a delayed impact, and so we're feeling it the worst that we felt ever, except for maybe directly after the crisis first hit, through layoffs and increasing household debt and all sorts of hardships and the like. Are people railing against capitalism? Not yet. I think that is, unfortunately, maybe something that we haven't been, the left hasn't been able to put out a clear alternative to, in terms of a system, an alternative system. And so what we can talk about is the attack on our public service, or what people understand is attack on our public services, attack on our democratic rights. And that is the anger that exists now, and it's a matter of organizing that and engaging in a discussion about the fundamental problems, or the fundamental contradictions of capitalism, and what an alternative might look like.
And there has been a call for an International Day of Solidarity, of support for the Korean workers and the jailed workers. 10 of the union leaders are in jail, including the president of the KPTU. How did that happen, and what kind of solidarity is building up around the world for Korean workers?
I had mentioned a massive protest that we had in 2005 in November. After that, there was a massive crackdown on union leadership, and including investigations, arrests, and now prison sentences. And so the president of the KPTU, one of our vice presidents of the KPTU, and several other union leaders are in jail in the appeals phase of their trial, but on sentences anywhere from several months to 5 years. And so there has been a lot of attention from ITUC or the International Trade Union Confederation, and other international unions and unions around the world, to getting them out of jail. And now with the strikes going on in rail and in trucking, and the arrests happening with our trucking members, as well as charges being made against the rail union, there is again, particularly from transport workers and the ITF, and also from PSI, there's been an amazing amount of support, and the ITF has called for a day of action on October 12th, and I believe there are embassy protests happening in several countries, including the United States, and protests in front of Korean embassies, as well as people are sending protest letters through Labor Start. You can download one from the ITF website, and it's sent by fax or email. And also, one of the greatest things is that people have been taking solidarity pictures with signs, which you can download from the website, that say, I support striking truckers or striking rail workers. And that is really great, because it's something that we can share with our members across language barriers, and they're in English and Korean. And so we keep feeding that, or sending out that solidarity through various outlets, social media, and our strike newsletters and things to keep giving, letting our members know that there are transport workers and other workers around the world that are supporting them. So all of that, participating in all of those ways would be really, really great.
So I want to thank you very much, Wolsan Liem, for giving this report on the struggle of the Korean transportation workers and the fight that you faced. And I'm sure American workers, when they find out about your struggle, will be interested in supporting your struggle for union rights, for democratic rights, and to live decently without the health and safety problems that you face. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek Radio.
Yeah, thank you.